Well, welcome everyone. I know it's not always easy to make time for these things, especially now we are, returning to kind of, I don't want to say normal, but, meeting people, not necessarily working from home all the time. So I know it's not so easy to find the time to be able to do this. So welcome here. So let's introduce the speakers that we've got. So we've got Duane, who luckily we can see him today. I know he's going to be putting himself on mute every now and then because I think he's working from a nightclub today. So he's the managing partner at ABLT. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So he works really closely.
Perfect.
Sorry?
Perfect, I said, yeah, very good.
So he works very closely with entrepreneurs, helping to launch and develop their businesses. He was previously the CEO of Victoria Beckham, where he set up the company's first growth investment fund. Then we've got Gina, who I have met very recently. When I say met, over Zoom, and she's the founding partner of the Venture Collective. So she's doing some amazing work transforming the VC industry because they invest into early stage businesses as well. They have a super diverse team, and they also invest into super diverse teams. So particularly entrepreneurs who are underrepresented. And then we've got Patrick, Schneider-Sikorsky. And I've actually just realized that your name combines two of my friends' names together. So that's a funny coincidence. And he is the founder of Beast Ventures. So he invests into early stage technology companies. I actually pitched to him a couple of years ago. So now it's his turn to be grilled. Well, I mean, nobody's going to be grilled today.
I hope I didn't grill you.
No, I'm only
badly last time. But, yeah. It was more of a conversation. Yeah.
It was. No, I'm only joking. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Maria Hvorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search, and we are an executive search firm working at the intersection of creativity, retail, and digital. And we work with companies that are based internationally looking for senior talent for them. So tend to be at sort of head of, director level positions. And obviously, now with the acceleration of digital and kind of helping to create content and, how brands and businesses are talking direct to consumer, that's the kind of teams that we help to build. So if that's what you're doing, then reach out and one of our team can have a conversation about that. So today's topic is investing in the new world order. So obviously COVID has changed how we work, how we do business, and I thought it would be an interesting conversation to look at it from an investor's perspective. So looking at how the landscape is changing, what investors are looking for, what trends there are there, how can brands be made recession-proof, or at least, what are we seeing that's going to be important in the future? And yeah, so as I said, would love to kind of get you guys involved as well in terms of asking questions. So, but do that at the end. So my first question, and I'm addressing that to all of you, is, well, how has the landscape changed in terms of investment? Like, what are you currently seeing? So maybe Zach, can I start with you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So what's changed? Good question. I certainly think that there is much more activity in early stage investments. I'm seeing the funds, the consumer funds that, I'm in touch with, who would typically write much larger checks and look at much larger businesses, are beginning to talk about either setting up seed funds or doing more seed investing. They seem to be coming to us, us being ABLT, as a potential source for earlier stage deals. So I think that's a change, whereas maybe a year ago we were more alone in the sector, in looking at early stage consumer brands, so early stage being sub 5 million in turnover. Now we feel like we're in a slightly more crowded space than before. I think that's a change. The other really strange change that I'm seeing is I'm seeing people talking about fashion in a more positive way as a potential target category. Again, you know, I went to a few kind of investor roundtables sort of a year before COVID, and certainly in the UK, fashion was perceived as a very difficult category to look at from an investor's perspective. It requires lots of capital, you know, it's predominantly reliant on a wholesale market, which was already volatile. Whereas now, I mean, I'm aware of a couple of new investment vehicles that have been set up to acquire, you know, either large minority or majority stakes in relatively early stage fashion brands. So I think that's an interesting change, not one that I would have predicted. And then, of course, trends that existed pre-pandemic have been accelerated. So customers wanting to know exactly what they're buying, where it's from, is it real? You know, customers actually Googling the names of founders of the brands that they're using their hard-earned cash to buy products from. Customers Googling, you know, specific chemical names from the beauty brands that they're looking to buy from to check their ingredients list. I mean, I just think those pre-existing trends have just been accelerated. So that's my experience of the space anyway.
No, I think this idea of transparency, and I'm sure Gina has a lot to kind of add to that, is you know, something that has already been going on. But you know, it's interesting that you're pointing out that that's also happening. I mean, this was already happening, but the acceleration is much stronger as a result of people kind of taking stock and thinking and prioritizing, I guess, in some ways. And Gina, well, let's go to you. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Zach's comments. I think a couple of things I'd add. One is obviously entrepreneurs need a certain level of resilience and resourcefulness. That's always key in early stage, but I think you're seeing that more and more as supply chains are breaking, as there's challenges distributing product, when people are looking to go in store now to figure out e-commerce. So I think a lot of the entrepreneurs are incredible in the ways that they've been navigating this kind of new normal as we see it. And that's been something that I'm sure we'll see more in future, and kind of a pivot generally towards more digital, even elderly people who are ordering online for the first time or setting up kind of financial technologies. So I think that's been a big pivot and something that will continue post-pandemic. I think that another thing we're seeing, as you noted, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement has just been huge. And I think that obviously the pandemic hasn't even stopped that. So obviously we have a skew towards underrepresented founders, but I think generally there's a bigger voice being heard. And we're now looking at the numbers, and it's going to be a record year, at least in the US, in terms of venture investing and underrepresentation. And it's probably not that hard to do, considering less than 3% of venture dollars went to female founders last year, and fewer than that went to minority founders. So we're trending in an upwards direction, but we still have an uphill battle there. And I think generally one of the things I've noticed is that for brands, they actually just can't compete on brand and features. They really have to have a differentiated quality now. People are maybe shopping a little bit less and being more particular about what they're purchasing. And I think one of the things that we've seen is the quality piece, and kind of the differentiation that's really transforming the way shoppers look at different products and how they're purchasing today.
I know obviously this is something that you have already been targeting from the inception of Venture Collective, but have you changed the way that you are investing now, or is it the same pre-pandemic?
Yeah, so we've always focused on our representation. I don't think we've changed too much our investing style in terms of the founders that we're evaluating. I think one of the things that we have seen now is that there's actually more and more people collaborating within the venture community to make sure that the Black and Latinx and female founders are all heard. So there's a lot of communities to share deal flow, to actually collaborate more, which I think is pretty amazing, since an early stage venture and beyond, you know, there are some firms that might be more isolating or not want to collaborate. So I think there's an amazing kind of community that's being built to cultivate more support and networks for these types of founders.
No, I think that's you know, in our previous webinars, we talked a lot about collaboration from a perspective of doing that virtually, and also this idea of kind of coming together and having a shared purpose. So it's good to see that it's spreading further than just, within, already established communities like workplaces, but actually across industries as well. Well, I'll come back to you on terms of, more kind of the diversity and the innovation piece. But Patrick, let's go to you in terms of, your thoughts on how the landscape is changing and how you're.
Yeah. So I mean, well, at Beast we tend not to invest in consumer startups or e-commerce or anything like that. We've always been more focused on deep tech and frontier technologies. And I'd say that probably at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of sort of panic investment decision making on some people's parts. A lot of people who focus on healthcare were suddenly like, okay, well, we need to find a company that does COVID diagnostics and invest in that immediately, or we need to find a company that's has some sort of silver bullet like PPE solution and so on. So that was a kind of a blip. But then I'd say towards the end of the year, a lot of people I was speaking to, well, they started thinking, I guess, more broadly and more philosophically about what they're investing in and why. And I think a lot of people were kind of quite shocked by the pandemic, and then we're thinking, well, why didn't we prepare for this? Why there no vaccines available, and so on and so forth. So I think there's definitely been more interest in healthcare startups. I'm seeing from investors who were not looking at these companies before, and that's I guess that's prevention, that's diagnostics, that's biotech companies that could potentially develop a vaccine for COVID or for whatever comes next. Hopefully that won't be anytime soon. But so there's definitely been a lot more interest in those types of companies. And also I think kind of thinking longer term, people are thinking, well, what is there, what other potential huge challenges are there on the horizon that we're not very well prepared for, and you could potentially address with technology. So obviously climate change is a huge one, is the most important challenge. So I've seen a big shift in interest towards climate technologies. So things like carbon capture, new types of battery technologies, or grid optimization software. A lot of people have raised funds in both in Europe and the States recently with this kind of positive, I guess it's kind of impact VC or impact deep tech investing. And I'd say the biggest thing was, I don't know if any of you saw this, but a week ago, Daniel Ek, the founder and CEO of Spotify, said that he's going to invest €1 billion of his own money in deep technology startups in Europe, which is huge and will massively transform the landscape and hopefully kickstart a whole new deep tech investing ecosystem over here. So that's what I've seen so far.
It just, in terms of what Gina talking about, kind of collaboration, are you seeing that as well, or not really?
Collaboration between investors.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always been a degree of collaboration. I guess at my stage, because I invest quite early. I think when you get to sort of, well, I invested at seed. I think when you get to Series A, it can get a bit more brutal. But I find in seed investors in Europe, especially those of us in deep tech, we kind of have to stick together because there aren't that many of us around. Anyway, but I guess there has been a kind of, I suppose people have reflected on the way they live their lives and the way they approach relationships and work, even as a result of this pandemic. So I'd say that people are friendlier, probably. Yeah, there's definitely an element to that.
I've noticed that as well. I think people just, whenever, they've been kind of put under threat, and all of a sudden you realize that you need to rely on your nearest and dearest and, your community. And when you've been separated from lots of people for a long time, you just realize how much we depend on each other. Yeah. So I suppose, there's an element of that. And obviously it's difficult times, but it's so kind of, you know, and obviously COVID has changed quite a lot of things. You know, some industries entirely have been put extremely under pressure, and some are thriving. But in terms of, you know, what you've seen as a success story, you know, what has been the biggest difference to those success stories in this year? Like what has stood out to you in terms of that?
In terms of startups that, well, I think, to be honest, it's probably too early to say. I think there are a lot of startups that were, you know, on a decent trajectory even before COVID, and they've managed to keep it together and you know, raise rounds that they were probably already discussing pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, it's yeah, I mean, just to repeat what Gina said, and it's a question of resilience. You have to assume that things will be okay. I wouldn't say assume that things will return to normal, because obviously you have to have some level of flexibility and, you know, adapt, but you have to just push forward. And especially, I think, as a startup founder with your team, with, you know, people terrified of, you know, redundancies and seeing, you know, jobs being lost left, right and center, you really have to, yeah, you have to kind of take that on your shoulders and reassure your team. And I think that's probably the difference between success and failure. You know, I'd say that maybe the pandemic has sort of exposed some weaknesses, as opposed to you know, as opposed to kind of force people to completely turn around their business. So I'd say if you were struggling to raise money pre-COVID, this might have hit you quite hard, unless you're in an area, sort of niche that benefits from this uniquely.
And thank you for that. And Gina, what do you think kind of like the winning qualities have been for successful kind of investments this year?
Yeah, so I think the biggest comment I would make is that the pandemic hopefully won't last forever. And there are some companies, as we've all alluded to, that have benefited from the pandemic, but you have to really look into the companies and the numbers, because traction is really important, and early stage, that might mean users rather than revenue or what have you. But I think that you have to really think longer term, because at the end of the day, when you invest in venture, particularly earlier stage, these are longer investment, right? And I think that one of the troubles I've seen is some people have seen deals that look so hot and have amazing annual revenues, but actually it's really just focused on the pandemic period. So that's one thing that I would say is really important, is focusing on long term and ensuring that. The other thing that I've noticed is a lot of companies did a really good job of creating lengthy runway for themselves, but some of the companies that are really struggling now are capital intensive businesses. A lot of clothing brands, for instance, in particular, to manufacture, et cetera, need that. So understanding kind of the dynamics of where they can go, some might be pausing now. And so looking at investment opportunities and bridge rounds has actually been really interesting now, because a lot of companies which have huge opportunity in future do need more capital right now. And so I've seen a couple of interesting opportunities come our way where you do have someone between a seed and Series A, or even slightly later in growth, where they're doing amazing things, great founders, but really do need a little bit of an extra capital injection to continue their journeys. And I think just generally, you know, we've talked about resourcefulness and resilience, but the founders are super important. And I think more than ever, you really need strong leaders who are thoughtful, who do take advice, who will listen to their investors, their advisors, people who really want them to succeed. And it's really important that the founders are there to build this business for the long term, to really help their people to understand what areas they need to focus on first, you know, in medium and long term. But the founders, especially early stage, but generally are hypercritical these days, because they are the ones who are going to make or break the organization at the end of the day.
You're talking, I mean, it's an interesting topic in terms of, you know, what makes a good team as well, in terms of, you know, when you're looking to invest, you're talking about, you know, listening to advisors, you know, people who really want them to succeed. What other qualities do you look for?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have a team that complements each other. So particularly in deep tech, for instance, you will have a lot of technical founders and they need that expertise, right? You need that experience, but you'll also need someone else there to be the commercial asset. You need someone to explain their story and narrative. Because one of the things that we've seen sometimes in medtech or health tech in particular, for instance, is that there's amazing companies and founders, but they don't explain their story clearly or their narrative. They sound very intelligent as they are, but it just doesn't come into layman's terms as much. And it's really hard to push the story when you can't clearly articulate it. So I think that it's really important to have a balanced team where you can have the people who are technical, who are commercial. And I think the other thing about teams that's really important too is we talked about diversity. And it's not just about on the surface diversity, but really diversity of experience. It's people who didn't come from the same industry or necessarily the same firm or what have you, but people who have different experiences and can bring those to the table. We have amazing founders who come from different continents, who come from different socioeconomic backdrops, who come from a different level of experience, who bring so many different ideas to the table. Because when you're early, you're super lean. And when you have only a few people, you want to bring as much ideas to the table and as many collaborative aspects as possible when you're very limited in terms of the amount of people that you're working with. So I think from a team perspective, that diversity aspect, particularly early on, is really helpful for building the foundations of a good business.
I'm curious because obviously this is something that your fund is, that's the essence of your fund to some extent. So do the businesses that come to you already have that, or do you sometimes have to educate them as well on that?
Definitely both. I mean, we get a lot of referrals from venture partners or from our shareholders, other people in our network, and those tend to be a different, I think, type of subset. Probably, investors know a little bit more about the entrepreneurs they refer. Proactive companies, we've seen a lot of great ones, but some of them we will say, we would love to invest, but we'd really like to, require that you bring a commercial person on or things like that. And you don't want to be prescriptive with founders. You don't want to build their business for them. It is their baby, but there are certain things that, could make or break a business, particularly early on. And so it is really important to give feedback. And I think always what we do with founders is make sure to give detailed feedback, whether we make an investment or not, to ensure that they're better equipped as they continue on their experience, whether it be fundraising or business building. But absolutely, there is a diverse range of founders, and we're very honest with where we think that their team could be developed, and where we believe the capital would be most suited to invest in next from a personnel perspective.
Mm. And with having diverse teams, I mean, what do you see compared to teams that are not? Once they kind of come to you and they're kind of, further down the line, what do you see?
There's a couple interesting trends. I think one thing I've noticed with female founders is they come to us with a much more developed idea than maybe a male founder would. And obviously this is a generalization, but for instance, we have 2 female founders who were ex-Johnson & Johnson for 15 years, already almost had their patents approved, had their prototypes, everything together. And this was for a pre-seed investment. And it's pretty amazing to me, but I think a lot of female founders are a little more hesitant. And same with my experience when I worked at BlackRock. Right? It's just a lot of women have more challenge with the art of the ask, with kind of coming with a half-baked idea. And I don't know if that's just something that will probably change in future, but I do find that. But I think with diverse teams too, the resourcefulness level is incredibly high. And that's just because traditionally a lot of these people don't have the embedded networks. We have founders who come from not the most amazing places and have built themselves up. Our first generation university students, these are people who have really challenged themselves their entire lives and have been incredibly thrifty and innovative in terms of how they're approaching their business and also how they're building it. So I think that's been a really big differentiator and incredibly amazing to see, because you just see kind of them coming from a challenging place to a beautiful and amazing place, and also transforming what they can provide to the community around them.
Mm. No, that's really amazing to see that. And I think, having that at the heart of the fund, and, really understanding how, the mentality makes a big difference to the founders that you work with. Well, thank you. Zach, can I ask you the same question in terms of, what have you seen that's working, in terms of what separates the winners from the losers, so to speak?
Yeah, sorry if it's too noisy, let me know. I think that one thing we haven't talked about is the culture, and I would say that if I just reflect on the businesses that I'm involved in, those that have found it easier to adapt to what's been going on, I would say it's a big part of it's down to the founder and how they have navigated the experience, and their ability to deal with the short-term crisis, but also to stay kind of positive about the longer term and not lose sight of that. So that's for sure an important factor. I've got, one founder in particular who, despite the pandemic, we're close to closing a fairly big investment deal for her business. And she has never lost sight of that, despite the fact that she's in the fashion category. She's seen a big part of her wholesale business, evaporate, and in fact has taken the decision to close a big part of her wholesale business, but she's never lost sight of the longer term goal of closing this deal, which, it has become even more important. But I think the other important factor to sort of a successful outcome is culture. And I really have seen those, remember I'm dealing with early stage consumer brands. So these are complex businesses in the sense that they're dealing with design, they're dealing with product development, they're dealing with manufacturing, they're dealing with marketing, customer acquisition, distribution, logistics. So although these are small businesses, they're businesses that have an inherent level of complexity, and the various kind of elements of their business have been, in most parts, massively impacted by COVID, either to supply chain or to distribution or to not being able to have your team in the studio at the same time. But culture has been the defining factor in terms of a successful outcome. And where I'm involved in companies where there's a culture of sort of being responsible for your own personal outcome, a sort of slightly decentralized decision-making process, so allows for sort of agile decision-making in each department, a culture whereby being honest about your fears, about not knowing how to resolve a particular situation, being open when you need help on something. That's really had a big impact in my experience, versus those organizations which have been more traditionally hierarchical. I'm involved in one business which is very much controlled from the top, which is very much an individual's sort of strategy and his decision-making process. And that business, although it's survived, pretty well through the pandemic so far, I think the team has been much more impacted by the pandemic, it would seem. The level of sort of anxiety is much higher. The time now being invested to kind of deal with staff questions, staff being concerned about their futures is much more intense. Whereas the former business, whereby I just feel the culture is one that's more open. I've seen, yes, I'm helping the founder now begin to answer questions around the longer term future for the business as far as the staff are concerned. I think the culture has really been the defining factor.
I think this, talking a lot about transparency and openness and bringing the team together rather than sort of, top down kind of decision making, that's making a difference. I mean, do you think that there are new skills are required in entrepreneurs now in the past?
Yeah, 100%.
By the way.
Sorry?
Sounds like the party's starting.
Well, no, there are two of us in here, so it's not much of a party. But anyway, of course, listen, being a founding entrepreneur is such a difficult job. It really, isn't for the faint-hearted. And already, you have to be someone with, huge amounts of flexibility in the way your mind works, huge amounts of emotional intelligence in the way you kind of manage and lead your business and your team. And now not only do you have the day-to-day challenges of running a business, but now you have the day-to-day challenges of dealing with a huge global crisis. So again, you know, founders are having to learn crisis management. Every founder goes through difficult phases in their business journey, from, you know, scaling up teams to scaling down teams when things change, to dealing with an international element, so big cultural differences if you're opening offices in international markets. But now, and those are hard enough to navigate as a, you know, particularly as a first-time founder. Certainly, I found those very difficult to navigate as a CEO of an international business. For the first time, it was hard. How do you manage a team in France versus a team in New York versus your home team? They're very different experiences. But now founders are having to learn crisis management.
Yeah.
So on top of all of that, you know, you're coaching individuals within your team through their own personal journeys. I think that's an incredible ask of a founder, and a skill they've had no choice but to develop.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing in situations of chaos and crisis, is that you're faced with something that you were not predicting, and you have to deal with what is and figure out and use your creativity and, I suppose, new ways of doing things. So you kind of have no choice but to do that. And in my opinion, that's what successful businesses do. You just, you know, and for an entrepreneur, I mean, that's correct. To be honest, it's a crisis management quite a lot anyway, because, you know, you assume something and then, you know, you try to test it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And now it's not just about the business, but also the consumer behavior is changing and being shaped by what's going on in the world, and trying to navigate that. It's a tough place to be.
But I think it's quite a unique situation now, because of course you deal with a crisis in business, and normally once you've dealt with the crisis is over and you move on. Mm-hmm. And they are moments in your journey. I think the difference here, particularly, and I'm coming back to staff, because in my experience, one of the first things we try and evaluate behind a good business is the team that's going to execute. And so for us as investors in early stage consumer, team is sort of everything, you know. And you're in a situation now as a founder where, you know, let's talk about furloughing, where you're making decisions because you have to preserve your cash flow, to furlough certain sections of your team, and then not knowing which sections you're going to unfurlough and at what stage, and which sections are going to be made redundant or not. So I think it's a unique challenge for founders, because it's not a one-off crisis that has a beginning and an end and then you can move on to your day-to-day business. And seeing how the founders I'm working with are adapting to this is incredible. I mean, I've been blown away by their ability to not only take on this challenge, but, you know, excel at it. And just because something is forced upon you doesn't mean you're going to handle it well. So I think that's the difference between a day-to-day business crisis and what we're dealing with now.
Mm. And Patrick, are you seeing this as well, or what are you seeing?
Well, no, I mean, I obviously agree with a lot of the stuff that Zach said. I mean, I think that you need, you do need a unique set of skills to navigate this. To navigate what's going on right now. No one alive has been through this specific problem, and you almost need some. Yeah, I mean, I think as a founder, to be honest, you need a kind of, you know, reality distortion field to carry on. That has to be quite strong, because you have to assume that things are going to get better sooner rather than later, even though none of us know what's going to happen. But, you know, we can't just shut up shop or kind of, or you know, furlough people, for example, and try and wait it out. So that's you definitely need this kind of blind optimism, which most good founders do have. But, you know, it's I've seen a few people who have been kind of slightly shaken up by this. I guess regarding some of the stuff that we invest in. The more research heavy businesses that are, you know, very, very kind of science driven. I think I guess the most damaging part is that people haven't been able to, or at least when things were locked down, people weren't able to go into like their labs and, you know, actually do physical work. But other than that, it has been kind of business as usual, in that, you know, these are companies that were going to take, you know, 3 to 5 years to get to market anyway. So they're not directly exposed to the recession or to the kind of shorter term hits that the economy has taken. But it's obviously it affects morale, it affects team cohesion when people can't all be in the same place. So yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, there's not I'd say deep tech companies are not necessarily recession proof, but they are. They're not on the same kind of cycle as some of the more consumer companies, which, you know, has always been the case. So it's not hasn't affected some of my portfolio companies as much as others.
Actually, there's a question from Pip Black, who is the co-founder of Frame, and actually it might be an interesting question to ask at this point, because, you know, we're talking about kind of in-person experiences, and also, you know, talking about this kind of blind optimism, or the ability to see that things are going to get better at some point in the future. And her question is like, what's the role of in-person experiences in a post-COVID world? And it's like talking about, you know, can you see a world when we're free to socialize again? And what does this mean for businesses like hers, which is all about working out in person? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think obviously I sincerely hope that we get back to, you know, as many in-person interactions and meetings as possible, especially for what I do. You know, we invest very early stage. As you know, the rest of the panel has said very clearly, it's really actually getting to know founders and getting to know founding teams is incredibly important, and it's harder to do that remotely. I think that you can sort of almost build up like a pipeline of, you know, of deals, or, you know, you can build up a kind of some even goodwill within or cohesion within a team that can ride out this, you know, pandemic for a year or even longer. But eventually that sort of that cohesion and those relationships will start to fray if everything is purely online. I guess regarding kind of businesses like the one you mentioned, which require working out in person. I think that's, you know, it's impossible for me to say. If I were to answer that question as to when people can go back to doing that, I'd be lying. I think it really depends on what happens with this with the virus, how things pan out over the next few months. Obviously, we've seen a huge rise in cases. Will that translate into, you know, to more deaths, more hospitalizations, you know, or will it, as the virus is becoming more infectious, is it becoming less deadly? We just don't know any of these things just yet. But in terms of my own personal preference, I mean, as soon as it's kind of safe and, you know, and convenient, I will go back to, you know, working out in the gym, for example. So I don't think this hasn't changed me in that, I'm never going to go to a gym again because of Corona. I think that it's just it's just the current situation that prohibits it, and hopefully we'll get back to normal rather soon.
No, I think we're all waiting for that to happen, or at least some kind of measures or ways of going about doing our day-to-day things with people, rather than staying in our homes and sort of sitting tight and waiting for it to just magically disappear. Well, Gina, actually, because your fund is focusing on, you know, diversity, you're talking about lots of, you know, there's a lot of different perspectives, so lots of different ideas. I guess the question is like, you know, can this help us innovate out of this crisis? And, you know, what kind of innovations are you seeing, or, you know, what are you feeling most hopeful about?
Yeah, so I think, we touched on in terms of the general topic of this discussion, we're seeing a lot of interest in sustainability in health tech / med tech, as noted earlier by Patrick, and in future of work, not surprisingly. So those three investing themes have been incredibly interesting broadly, and I think a lot of people are doing interesting things in those spaces. One of the companies that we invested in is really bringing pet health tech home. So understanding, right now, at least in the US, you can't go to the vet unless you have an emergency or anything like that. But, this team has done something that kind of revolutionizes digital health tech for pets. In terms of consumer, I think one of the most interesting businesses that we're working in right now actually is called Vitra Labs, and they can take one biopsy of a cow and perpetually reproduce leather without harming an animal, which is pretty unbelievable. And the past couple of years they've been working on this, but they're commercializing now, and it's pretty incredible to see, because one of the other things we've seen as kind of a silver lining, if you will, is the climate change issue and how much we've really influenced in a positive direction with, reduced flights, with reduced transit to work and so forth. And I think that sustainability piece is really critical because it is good for the world. And to be honest, sustainable businesses, and this comes from my experience at an asset management firm and a venture firm, actually makes businesses themselves more sustainable. So you see a bigger path to a longer term future and growth from them. So I think that that's going to be something that we're going to experience a lot. And these innovations to really not only, do well, but do good has been critical in terms of advancing a lot of what's going on today and making sure that we come back to a better world, not just a healthier world, but a cleaner world and a more eco-responsible world.
Vitra Labs is amazing, by the way. I know Ingvar.
Oh yeah.
It's an awesome company.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And I think that that's one of the things too, is you have these founders and he's obviously more science focused, but they are super driven to change the world. And that's a big thing. We love impact businesses. And I think the fact is these are people who are really making a difference, and it's not just for now, it's forever. And so if you can kind of identify those types of people, it's pretty amazing. And I think it inspires others as well. We have a founder community too. We have a platform they can engage with each other. And I think it's been great for them to talk about their issues and qualms and concerns, and just almost like a group therapy session. But it's nice for them to know that they're not alone and that people are finding different challenges, whatever industry they're in. Because we do invest and focus on underrepresentation, but we invest across a ton of different segments. So we have a very diverse book, which has been really interesting to see, but a lot of them are suffering similar issues. And I think the collaboration amongst them has been great in terms of helping them develop and continue with a more positive outlook.
I think that has been the positive outcome and this is what I'm hearing from businesses, and the conversations that we're having is this, as I said earlier, kind of coming together and, sharing issues and like this, feeling that you're not alone, that there is similarities in the kind of issues that you're having. And I think that's what the amazing thing about, if you want to take away something positive out of something that's really, really negative, I feel like that is definitely happening. I'm feeling that. But I think that, just talking about that business about, replicating, I didn't get the technical ways of doing that, but in terms of almost, harvesting leather, that it's a sustainable business. I mean, for a fashion business, that's an incredible thing to have. And, looking beyond just producing product, but actually having a different way of creating it in the first place can be completely revolutionary. I mean, Zach, are you seeing, or what kind of innovations are you seeing within more kind of consumer fashion space right now?
Less so in fashion, just because we haven't been focused on that the last few months, but certainly in the cosmetic space, we're involved in one business which was really at the forefront of trying to really eradicate any kind of landfill byproducts from its products, and also try to create a totally sustainable and sort of chemical free supply chain. So they, very early on, at the beginning of their journey, were, growing their own raw ingredients and trying to create products that didn't use water, so that you're not shipping gallons of water around the world. Equally, trying to find local solutions to internationalize their business. So having local products with local supply chains for a local customer base. So these initiatives that we were attracted by when we started working with this particular brand, back in 2017, are now were considered relatively niche at the time, and certainly now these initiatives are initiatives that are driving this business forward, driving really high levels of customer engagement, giving them a real sense of identity at a time when people are looking for the sort of values behind the brands that they're buying. So I think, as I said at the beginning, I'm really pleased in many ways that the pandemic has just accelerated certain important changes, certainly on the consumer side, that needed to happen before and were happening in a small way, and those changes have been accelerated now, so that we are talking about the fact that the fashion industry really shouldn't be making any virgin materials anymore. I mean, there's enough pre-existing material in circulation to make any number of trousers or shirts or coats, and so we need to find a solution to use that. And equally in all consumer product categories, certainly no consumer needs any more packaging that's going to end up in landfill. So what are the solutions to solve that particular problem? And now we're seeing.
I have a solution for that particular problem if you're interested. There's a great startup I met from the States that's trying to address the e-commerce packaging problem using reusable packaging with trackers in them. So
I would love the intro, Patrick. That would be amazing.
Yeah, they're fundraising now.
Brilliant. Okay, we can have this conversation after. That would be great.
Yeah.
But exactly, I think that investors, 3 years ago, this sector felt relatively niche, and my sense is that it's become far less niche as the consumer demand for brands that showcase these aspects of their business is just increased exponentially in the last few months.
I'd like to open this up to our audience now. We've got 10 more minutes to go. I mean, I've got a few questions that I still would like to ask, but maybe our audience might be interested in asking them. So whilst we wait for some of the questions to come in, I'll start with the questions that we've had from our audience that have submitted them earlier. So let's have a look. So there is a question, which is, which markets or specific applications have most inspired you as we have navigated the pandemic? I mean, talking about the packaging with trackers, that sounds quite interesting. But anything, and talking about the leather, harvested leather business is interesting. But anything else that have inspired you? So markets or specific applications. Should I pick on someone? Gina?
I mean, I think just, I know it was noted earlier, but like med tech and health tech, I just think that there's a lot of digital health solutions out there, and this is both physical and mental. I think we've seen a huge wave of mental wellness solutions because one of the other issues is a pandemic of loneliness right now. And I know that's kind of sweeping the nation. I know that's global. And I think right now there's a big focus on employers or individuals to really look at their mental wellness in addition to their physical wellness. And so I've really noticed a big change in people really looking to enhance kind of who they are and kind of their own self-worth and self-value. So that's been definitely an area where I've seen a lot of growth in terms of the amount of companies, and also looking at companies like mine and so forth that are really just exploding because of the need for this type of solution. I also think that an area, obviously at-home fitness is huge. We saw Lululemon acquire Mirror in the US for $500 million. And I think that eventually, I do believe from the question before that people want to be together in a kind of forces you to try harder and work harder if you see other people around you. But I think, again, that whole wellness space is huge for the individual consumer right now, as they're navigating this period and realize that there's a lack of certainty about when it will end. So trying to kind of bring back some aspects of their normal routine so they can feel a semblance of normalcy, and kind of continue on their journeys as well.
No, for sure. I mean, with Mira, I actually got a Peloton bike before the pandemic in January. And then when I've seen the news about Lululemon acquiring Mira, I was like, oh my God, another thing that I must have in my room. But no, I mean, jokes aside, I think definitely that aspect is really important, especially as what I think we're moving into more of a hybrid working model. So, you know, I don't think I think some businesses for sure will want to return completely working from the office. But I think many have realized during this time is that yes, people can work from home. It can reduce, you know, people's commute time. It, you know, means that they can be a little bit more flexible when it comes to their families, and that's a benefit to, you know, employee well-being and hence productivity. So with this hybrid model, when you're not commuting, that you can actually do these, you know, things from home, exercise, and, you know, if you can't, you know, another kind of big wave of cases is upon us and we actually don't want to go to the gym, but we can do that from home. But having the option and having that flexibility, I think is really important.
I think another thing that will accelerate as a result of this pandemic, and obviously it's not as easy to do. Not that these things are easy, but it's a lot harder to do than something like Peloton or Mira is. At-home diagnostics. I think, you know, obviously these things have long cycles because they require, you know, trials, FDA approvals, and so on and so forth. But I think one thing I've noticed is that I've been investing in like medtech for a long time, and I've been interested in health and diagnostics for a long time. But I noticed a lot of people are now far more health conscious than they were before the pandemic. You could even say that it's turned a lot of people into hypochondriacs, which is not, you know, obviously not ideal. But like, you know, the idea that you have to, you know, call up a helpline and, you know, wait and travel for miles to get a test done or whatever, and then you don't get your result, or it seems very, very clunky and very disorganized. And we actually, you know, there are technologies now that you can have at home, like a Peloton, that will, you know, give you some basic pathology results, or, you know, they're already at home blood pressure monitors and heart rate, all these wearables and so on. But I think that, you know, the wearables that we see now are the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to, over the next 5 years, we'll see far more granular diagnostics available to consumers, and this pandemic will have accelerated it.
And Zach, actually, this could be an interesting question for you. I mean, talking about the fashion industry, but let's just take consumer industry as a whole. I mean, obviously, you know, fashion being particularly badly hit during COVID. I mean, what do you think the future business model for consumer businesses will look like in the post-COVID world?
I mean, the obvious statement is that they need to be much more digitally aware than they ever were before, which sounds obvious, but for many fashion brands, certainly wasn't the case pre-COVID. And obviously we've seen a huge acceleration of sales moving online. So I think, you know, brands are scrambling to build their in-house capability and to really engage directly with their customer in a way that they never have done before. So you're seeing a shift towards a DTC model in fashion, and then on DTC, I think you're seeing a shift sort of more towards fashion in terms of having a point of difference in the market as fashion brands become more tech savvy. I think the other area that I'm seeing that I've been impressed by are those brands that do have physical, be them stores or outlets. Now, some have just shut up shop, have been forced and have sort of redirected all of their efforts to their online business, and that's fine. And you know, some have done well from that strategy. There are a few others that have found super creative ways to transform their physical spaces, so that they're still benefiting, if not from sales, and certainly from customer acquisition and customer engagement. So there's one brand, another brand that we're involved in that has transformed one of its stores into a experiential vending machine, which I thought was super clever. So it's very Instagrammable, it's very safe from a COVID perspective, and yet the customer's still experiencing the brand in a physical location that was previously a store. So I think that for me is the type of innovation that you know, consumer and specifically fashion is going to need to embrace more so than ever before. And I think that, you know, perhaps that's a chance for fashion to kind of save itself in a way, and for retail to be reinvented. But I've seen a couple of examples of that. As a hospitality business that I'm involved in, that had just invested an absolute fortune in refitting a large flagship sort of restaurant space that it had. And overnight, the founder decided, this was very early on, this is early March, that the business had to be transformed into a takeaway model. There was no way that he could safely operate, you know, a seated service going into the pandemic. And so, again, you know, incredibly transformative skills to turn a, you know, 5,000 square foot space into a super efficient, you know, I mean, takeaways is selling it short, but essentially making it a space that customers could easily access very safely. And that, I mean, that's seen his business increase by 300% during COVID. You know, and he's in one of the business categories that by and large has been, you know, the worst hit. So I think that's an impressive transformation that I've seen.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about, you know, retail theatre and, you know, having experiences. I mean, this has been kind of branded around for so long, but actually now is the moment to start doing that, because retail in particular is heavily hit, and it's like having people to be in a safe environment, but also, you know, why do you even go to a store? But yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of, you know, fashion, beauty, kind of consumers, direct to consumer, and, you know, having that conversation with your customer becomes extremely important, because that's where, you know, at the moment, that's where, you know, the customer is going to, and that, you know, they're online, and if you don't have that, then that's an issue. I've got more questions, but I think we're going to have to just have one last one, and this is to all of you. And I thought that was a really, well, I think I'm kind of paraphrasing that, but there's obviously lots of advice that you can give to entrepreneurs, to brands, to companies that you invest in. But what's your number one? What should be the number one to do for an entrepreneur or a business right now? So maybe Patrick, I'll start with you.
Oh, I'm not sure if I could boil it down to one piece of advice, but I would say just, you know, well, pay attention to what's going on. You know, obviously you've got to be kind of resilient and quite stubborn, but at the same time be adaptive and flexible, and try and look out for opportunities, because there are like the one that Zach just mentioned, there are a lot of new opportunities as a result of this pandemic, and if you're too head down, you'll miss them.
Okay, well that's I think that's good. And Gina, what about you? What's like the number one on the to-do list for brands, entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think along the same lines as Patrick, it's really just listen. I think a lot of people will kind of go headstrong into things, investor meetings, trying to figure out manufacturing, et cetera, but they actually don't really just sit down, listen to feedback, absorb it, and input. And they're going at 1,000 miles an hour trying to make their business work. And again, these people early stage are very lean teams, have a lot going on. But I think it's been an amazing environment where if someone's invested in you, if you have advisors, they want you to succeed. And I think the founders that have done the best in this period have really taken a step back, reflected, understood how they in the short and long term can succeed. And a lot of that has been due to the fact that they are very open to listening to advice, to hearing things they might not be interested in hearing, to maybe, you know, pausing on an initiative that they are really excited about because they know it's just not the right time. And so that whole element tying into the culture piece we talked about before, tying into how important it is to really make sure that you are resilient, and also that, again, you're collaborating is hugely critical. So those entrepreneurs, I think, will succeed.
No, very good advice. And Zach?
I would say look at your business strategy for the next 12 months and don't worry about the things that you can't control. Focus on the initiatives that you can control and deliver, because in the end, you know, things are changing so fast. There are going to be many things that we can't control, and those things are going to shift and move around, but there will be a number of initiatives in your plan that you can deliver against, and just do your best to deliver those.
Great, well, thank you. And really amazing advice, and wonderful to hear your insights and your expertise, and, you know, listening to what's going on in that space. And I actually learned quite a lot, and I think this kind of taking a step back and listening and transparency and collaboration, so all these positive things are coming out from that, and that, you know, you still are investing, that, you know, things are still happening. I think it's so positive to hear that. And as I said in all of these webinars pretty much, is that I'm really hopeful in terms of the innovations that come from this, because whenever there is chaos, there's opportunity. And I truly believe that. So, you know, our job is to be able to kind of bring people together, share ideas, you know, hopefully give a little bit back to our community, and, you know, get that expert advice and insights from our kind of nearest and dearest. So I really appreciate you being here. So thank you, Zach, Gina, and Patrick. And would love to get your feedback from our audience as well, you know, what you thought. And yeah, and welcome you again, hopefully in another month's time when we do another one of those. And any ideas for what you'd like to hear about, or who you'd like to hear from, let me know and drop me a line. But thank you again, and I'll let you get on with your full lives and, you know, talking to amazing, interesting people, and have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you all. All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.